Shall we begin?
Yeah, Aniruddha, you can start.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar organized by APEA and DMEO. And today we are going to talk about a very interesting and important topic, Data Governance Quality Index, creating pathways for ushering in GovTech 3.0 to transform evidence-based policymaking. And we have a very interesting panel today to talk about it. One of the reasons, the objectives of this session is to how to discuss and unpack and understand how governments can increasingly use the administrative data for guiding policy. Because with good evidence-based policymaking comes better delivery of programs and schemes at the grassroots level. It will also help us to unpack how data governance index exercise initiated by the Government of India is trying to enable this transition from an intuition-based policymaking to more of an evidence-based policymaking. Before to start up the webinar, I'll request. Can we have the next slide, please? Next slide. Yeah, just before we start off, a few of the housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphone and video disabled, because then it will help us disable connect better. For questions, please and answers, please leave them in the chat box so that we can pick it up when we are talking, when we get into our question and answer session. And keep, as you hear, do keep those questions coming. For opening remarks, can I request Asela, who is also the president of Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, SLEvA, to give his opening remarks. Asela, please.
Thank you, Aniruddha, and good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone, wherever you are from. And welcome to the 27th webinar SLEvA is organizing together with other partners on Data Governance Quality Index, creating pathways for ushering in GovTech 3.0 to transform evidence-based policymaking. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. This is jointly organized by Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, and Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, the Government of India, NITI Aayog, Government of India. We must also thank DMEO, Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, NITI Aayog, Government of India, for partnering with us and also joining as facilitators and speakers of this webinar. And as I mentioned, this is the 27th webinar organized by Sri Lanka Evaluation Association over 2 years. Monthly webinars have been organized in partnership with different partners, including EvalYouth Sri Lanka and Center for Evaluation, University of Sri Jayewardenepura in Sri Lanka. So today our moderator is, of course, Aniruddha Brahmachari, board member of Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and also co-group member of Evaluation Community of India. And we have 3 speakers, Anand Trivedi, Director DMEO, and Gunjan, Saini, Research Officer DMEO, and Aishwarya, Salvi. I welcome all of them. I'm sure that Aniruddha will introduce them properly. And also I welcome all the participants for this important webinar. The other thing I want to mention is DMEO is a formal partner of Asia Pacific Evaluation Association for technical collaboration. This is a very important partnership between a government institution, evaluation institution, as well as regional WOPE. So this partnership means a lot for us. At the same time, DMEO is doing a lot of work to promote evaluation ecosystem in India. So with this note, this webinar is, a milestone for us. So let me hand over to Aniruddha. And again, I warmly welcome all of you to this webinar.
Thank you, Asela, for this warm welcome. And to take us into the webinar, we have got three very important and interesting people who are hands-on leading this whole piece of work. Anand Trivedi, he is the director of DMEO, NITI Aayog, and he comes with 13 years of work experience in M&E, technology, and data-driven governance. And he has won the important and prestigious National Social Innovation Foundation's Best Social Innovation Award. Our second speaker from his team only is Gunjan Saini. She's a research officer in the DMEO and NITI Aayog. She has over 4 years of experience in M&E, banking, and finance, and is involved with the development of output outcome monitoring framework and the data governance quality index, about which we are going to talk about today. Our next speaker as part of this present as a team is Aishwarya Salvi. She's a young professional within the DMEO NITI Aayog. She has 3 years of workspace experience in M&E and law, and is involved in the execution of the data in governance quality index and monitoring of energy and food processing sector. I welcome all of them, and we all are looking forward for an interesting presentation and sharing of work they are doing in data governance quality index. Over to Anand, Gunjan, and Aishwarya. Over to you.
Thank you, Aniruddha and Asela, for this organizing this wonderful webinar. In fact, APA's webinar series has been one of the striking features of the M&E ecosystem in the region, and it's a pleasure to be contributing here. Quickly getting on to the topic and the discussion here, it's important to understand that we will, during this entire presentation, while we'll discuss about the DGQI exercise per se, we will try and focus on some of the learnings that we have gathered during the course of this 2-year journey of institutionalizing data governance quality index within the government of India, so that it becomes more relevant for any government or development program implementing agency in any context, be it at the national, state, district level, or for civil societies and the other organizations. The idea really is to generalize these findings so that they can be taken forward and back into our individual professions wherever we are. Next slide, please. So we will start by understanding why this exercise is important. Where is it placed in the entire evidence-based policymaking ecosystem per se, and how is it critical from the point of view of enabling the use of administrative data systems, which essentially Aniruddha ji talked about, and what is the role of GovTech 3.0? How is it transforming this entire exercise so that it's going to take a center stage in the overall monitoring and evaluation systems going forward? Having understood the criticality of DGQI in this broader landscape, we will get into the specifics of what it is, what is the methodology and its specific constituents, and then how was it implemented and some of the operational details therein. Drawing these learnings, we will then talk about who all can use DGQI, how can that particular exercise be implemented in different contexts, and what are some of the operational do's and don'ts of taking these learnings forward. So that's the broad agenda we have. We have a 30-minute presentation, and then we'll have a question and answer discussions based on that. Next slide, please. So why DGQI? Next slide. Essentially, if you look at any developmental program and map it on the results chain, we all know as evaluators and monitoring specialists that any developmental program can have these 5 different steps. And to be able to understand where monitoring and evaluation comes in, next slide, please. Yeah. So if you look at this, specifically monitoring deals with the first 3 steps of a results chain. So we typically implement monitoring, we typically utilize monitoring for concurrent observations during the implementation stage to see whether inputs are being provided on a timely basis, whether the activities are being implemented exactly as per the plan, whether the physical deliverables or outputs are being delivered. And then largely outcomes and impacts falls under the purview of evaluations. However, outcomes-based monitoring is also picking pace across various countries. And generally, both monitoring and evaluation rely on different types of data requirements. So next. Administrative data is the key part that enables monitoring, whereas evaluations tend to largely depend on survey-based data. However, a lot of unconventional data sources are also now being used in the evaluation space. Now, focusing on the entire idea that there is, at this point in time, this sort of line that exists between monitoring and evaluation, because we know that often in our own professions as well, we typically look at evaluation quite differently from the perspective of monitoring. The specialists, the skills and the specialist requirements are also very different. Now, if we just look at what is happening in the administrative data ecosystem, we realize that because of this technological onslaught that we are seeing, essentially administrative data is becoming extremely granular. We are able to generate very high frequency administrative data almost on a near real-time basis in various sectors now. And the quality of the data is also improving because it is turning transactional in nature. And I'll talk about some examples in this context. Because of this, essentially, instead of just being able to monitor inputs to outputs, administrative data is now being able to monitor even outcomes and impacts. And in triangulation with the survey data, it is able to completely monitor the entire results chain of the entire program, both from a monitoring and evaluation perspective. Hence, what we are effectively seeing is the line between monitoring and evaluation is getting blurred. That is what effectively is the center stage of where administrative data is going to play a critical role in M&E ecosystem going forward. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about administrative data, what all data are we actually talking about? It can be the data which any government or development agency gathers in the process of implementing the program. It can be any data which is captured. For example, we are talking of MG Narega or any other Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin or any program that collects information about that particular scheme in the course of its implementation. Second, we have a lot of data which is collected in the course of delivering digital services to the citizens. That is GST, for example, or any form of services like you are looking for, let's say, for example, UPI or metro services or any form of government to citizen services. Then there are a lot of data sets which are generated as statistics across the board in the process of public administration. Now, these are crime stats or suicidal stats and so on and so forth. And then we also have a lot of data sets which are generated in the process of compliance, like tax returns and so on and so forth. All these constitute different types of administrative data. Generally, what characterizes administrative data is it is a lot more frequent, unlike the survey-based data sets which are more intermittent in nature. Secondly, it is also typically covering universal on a universal basis, unlike a sample basis. So with this understanding of administrative data, it is important to understand now that how is technology changing this entire area of administrative data. Next slide, please. So generally in India, if you look at the phase in which the e-governance, or let's say GovTech, which is basically nothing but when we say GovTech, it essentially encompasses all sorts of technology-based applications that the state uses for the purpose of delivering its mandate of welfare to its citizens. Now, in that broader context of what we call GovTech, and if you look at how this entire GovTech has evolved over the last few years, then we can broadly categorize them into three different phases. From 1990s to late 2000s, we saw what was the first GovTech 1.0 revolution. Basically, it was nothing but digitization and computerization, where all the paper-based records were converted into digital records. Then from somewhere around 2008 or 10 till 2020, what we saw is the second GovTech, second version of, let's say, GovTech revolution, wherein we are seeing that each and every specific schemes and services are getting digitized end to end. So right from the point you apply to the point you get the service, the entire process is digitized. However, each of these programs or services that you get are siloed digital systems, which is where we saw proliferation of large number of services, large number of IT systems within the government, but they did not speak to each other. However, they ended up giving a lot of siloed but good services within those individual silos. As a result, we have these MIS systems with dashboards on top of them, which are largely meant to serve the purpose of top-down decision making. And that was kind of fostered with the National Data Sharing and Accessibility Policy of 2012. From this point in time till 2020, we are now going to get into the next phase, which is basically GovTech 3.0. Now in GovTech 3.0, we are going to see that all these individual silos of MIS systems that exist within the government are going to be broken, because this is the age of open digital ecosystems. We are not talking of systems, we are talking of ecosystems. We are talking of these individual silos talking to each other through interoperable, unbundled data services and registries, which are seamlessly able to work across the system. So for example, we know that UPI is one such platform which has enabled large number of payment services to be integrated and private sector innovations on top of them. Similarly, we are seeing that in case of the Ayushman Bharat Digital Health Mission, the India's National Digital Health Mission, we will eventually see that all our health records will be threaded together irrespective of the systems that they lie in. Maybe I was earlier in Gujarat and now I'm in Delhi. All these, my health records which lie in individual Gujarat and Delhi's health records will get integrated. And as a result, if we just think a step forward, if large number of these records are anonymized and then they can be analyzed, we will have actually a lot of indicators which we otherwise have to depend on intermittent NFHS surveys to capture available in the near real time from a large set of population, which can then drive policy making. So that is what we are going to see as the potential of GovTech 3.0 and how it will going to transfer administrative data systems. Next slide, please. However, to go from this GovTech 2.0 to 2.3, the current administrative systems have to be looked at closely. And when we did that, we realized that there are large number of challenges which can hinder this transition, which can hinder the realization of the potential of administrative data in blurring the lines of M&E that we earlier talked about. For example, these data sets are currently either not granular enough, nor are they at times frequent enough for them to transition. Often, these data systems do not have very well-defined metadata standards or even data schemas which can enable these silos to talk to each other. Moreover, at the point of capture, there aren't real data quality mechanisms at times which have been put in place which can ensure enough validation so that whatever data is being captured through these MIS systems is of very high quality. And because of lack of openness and accessibility as well as sometimes machine readability, the seamless exchange of this data has become an issue. More importantly, because of all these issues, we see that data use is largely getting limited to the point where that we are only focusing on reporting and top-down decision making. And often because of this, we are also finding that the human resources constraint that the governments have, typically in the area of data analytics and digital ecosystems, is becoming a major constraint. Now, to be able to address these challenges and enable the smoother transition from DGQI to GovTech 2 to GovTech 3, the DGQI exercise was conceived and thought about. So with that background, I'll now request Gunjan to explain the specific objectives of DGQI and the methodology that was adopted.
Thank you, Anand. So with this background about how there were significant challenges that were faced by present administrative data systems in India, the government of India felt that there was a need to undertake an exercise called the Data Governance Quality Index, or the DGQI exercise, with one key long-term objective in mind. The objective was to break the present data silos that are existing within the ministries among its scheme divisions, as well as across ministries, with the help of digital highways, such that they enable proactive and seamless scheme and service delivery to citizens. So by this, we mean that instead of different ministries and different scheme divisions having their own MIS, own dashboards for the different schemes that they are executing. They can be central registries and central type unbundled data services that can be used by all these ministries to provide these services in an integrated manner to the citizens, so that it improves the overall efficacy of these programs by offering integrated services. So to meet this overall vision, there were 4 key objectives with which the DGQI exercise was designed. First was to prepare a self-assessment diagnostic tool that can be used by the ministries to understand why it is important for them to focus on their administrative data systems and start contemplating on how they can improve these systems. Then second, use the same self-assessment tool to also assess their data preparedness levels on a single framework in parallel and create scorings and rankings such that there can be a measurement of their data preparedness levels on a same framework. Then third, after this measurement is done, to use this measurement to enable the ministries to identify their areas for improvement and then start adopting reforms so that they can not only improve the DGQI scores, but also improve their data preparedness levels. And finally, because this exercise was being conducted across schemes and across ministries of diverse nature, several good practices of how ministries are using their data well for scheme implementation or for monitoring were coming into picture. So an important objective was to also enable the peer learning by documenting and disseminating these best practices of ministries with each other, so that they can learn from each other and move to better data preparedness levels. So with this objective, in order to meet these goals, the DGQI architecture was designed with 2 main arms in mind. First of all, the measurement, which this arm will focus on measuring the data maturity level across the ministries. And secondly, then using this measurement for actions to improve the data preparedness levels. And both these dimensions or arms were tied together by a high-level mandate, which was coming from very senior officials at the Government of India level, so that the momentum in the exercise is continued over a long period of time. So under measurement, there were 3 main principles that were considered while framing this data maturity model or this index. First of all, to have a standard framework that can be used to assess the data maturity levels of ministries which are of different types. They're undertaking schemes of different types. They have different types of data. But at the same time, have enough flexibility in that framework so that we are not penalizing them at the cost of standardization. So this was important to ensure that there are different types of data systems that are being developed and improved upon. But at the same time, there is a standard way of benchmarking their data preparedness level also. The second was to have this as index implemented in self-assessment mode. So rather than some organization or DMEO doing an external evaluation of the data systems of these ministries, we conducted this exercise in self-assessment mode, where a survey was floated and the ministries were allowed to self-assess their data preparedness levels. So this was important to meet the first objective of the exercise, that it triggers internal contemplation. It does not come as an external evaluation. And third main principle was to ensure that the exercise is self-reflective and action guiding. So the focus was never on having competition across ministries and unnecessary comparisons across ministries. It was more so that the ministries are using this exercise to introspect and figure out where they need to improve and accordingly take reform actions. So with this action guiding principle in mind comes the second dimension, which were the actions to improvise. So the exercise institutionally looked at 3 main mechanisms for the ministries to improve their data preparedness levels. Obviously, ultimately, the ministries will have to undertake the reform actions, but the exercise tried to encourage 3 main types of activities that may be undertaken to structurally and efficiently move to achieve this aim. So first was setting up necessary institutions at the ministry level in the form of data and strategy units. So these will be cells reporting to the highest level in the ministries and cooperating and collaborating with all the other divisions of the ministry to improve their data preparedness levels. Second was planning processes. So this data strategy unit will then develop an action plan And then it will regularly monitor and track whether this action plan is being implemented on time or not by all the ministry officials. So such processes were put in place. And then finally, an integral part was capacity development of the ministry officials at all levels to ensure that the action plan is actually being able, that the ministries are actually able to implement these action plan. So for that, necessary capacity augmentation and development in specifically in data analytics domain was required. So the exercise also focused on this aspect. So these three mechanisms were put in place for the ministries to start working upon and initiate the reform actions. This way, the index took an agile approach. It started off by measurement, then identifying reform actions, and then regularly tracking the reform actions also, and also keep on regularly measuring also to track the progress, to make sure that the reform actions are actually helping to improve the data preparedness level. So this way, it was a regular measurement, action, and review exercise. So with this architecture, this is the wide scope of the ministries and the schemes that have been covered under the exercise. So we covered 74 ministries, departments of the Government of India, and we collected data on the data systems of over 630 plus central sector and centrally sponsored schemes, which are implemented by ministries to offer, different kinds of services to Indian citizens. As well as we covered different non-schematic interventions. So apart from schemes, there may be other digital interventions that may be used by ministries to track some sector activity, or let's say for some scheme, for some service delivery, which is not a scheme. So for these such digital interventions also were covered under this exercise. So with this huge scope, we were able to cover approximately 80% of the scheme budget of the Government of India. And we collected approximately 35 lakh data points on how these schemes have developed their data systems and how they're using this. So with this brief overview on the architecture and scope, we'll quickly now discuss the methodology that was used for building this measurement and this index. So based on a rigorous review that we did of data maturity models that were already existing, we identified the theory of change of data preparedness. So we found that there were three main steps that are needed to move to better data preparedness and to be able to ride the GovTech 3.0 revolution wave. The first of which was data strategy. So this entailed building better data strategy, that is better guidelines and action plan by the ministries or by any organization which will essentially lay down the plan for how they want to improve their data preparedness at the organizational level. So under this, we covered the two themes, data and strategy unit and the action plan, which were mandated as institutional mechanisms to be followed by the ministries for improving their data preparedness levels. So we covered how have they developed these units and whether the action plan is being implemented on time or not. The second pillar was data system. So after the strategy has been laid down, then it is important for organizations or ministries to start developing the systems for undertaking various types of data processes, right from data generation, that is how will this data be generated, what granularity and frequency at which it will be generated, then maintaining its data quality, then analyzing it, using it for decision making purposes, and disseminating it via different user friendly platforms and dashboards. All this was covered, as well as different enablers that would be important in setting up these systems, such as use of emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence or IoT, which are becoming more and more used in public policy space, balancing data security and privacy needs, as well as undertaking a holistic view of data management across its life cycle so that it is managed properly. All of these three themes were also covered. And finally, the third step of how this data is then being used to drive outcomes was looked at in the third pillar of data-driven outcomes, where we covered four themes of how data is being synergistically used by ministries internally, as well as in partnership with other data collection agencies. So to ensure that they're actually moving towards the open data systems, open data ecosystems, and how then they're using this data for cross-functional prescriptive analytics. Also, as we mentioned, because the exercise involved a lot of good practices coming in, that theme was also included. So in terms of weightages, we gave maximum weightage, 60% weightage to data systems, as it is one of the key most important pillars where the outputs become visible of the inputs that are that goes in the data strategy, and also they enable the outcomes. So therefore, the maximum weightage was given to data systems, and the other two pillars were given equal weightages. And with this weightage system and themes, a self-assessment questionnaire was drawn out for the ministries. For each scheme, the ministry filled up this questionnaire, and with the help of this methodology, we provided a score between 0 to 5 to it. And then using these scheme-wise scores, we arrived at a ministry-wise score by taking a simple average of these scores. So with this understanding of what is DGQI, I'll now request Aishwarya to come in to explain how was this exercise implemented and how can others use the learnings from this exercise.
Thank you, Gunjan. So let's look at how DGQI can be implemented for improving data systems. So the DGQI exercise adopted an operational approach, which can be largely broken down into 5 phases. So in the first phase, we conducted extensive research and review of the data maturity models, which are used across private and public sectors. We refer to the models developed by the US federal government, the Smart Cities Mission in India, IBM, and CMMI. In the second phase, we focused on development of the DGQI framework. So based on these learnings, we designed a theory of change and also designed a DGQI self-assessment questionnaire. The third phase focused on development of the DGQI dashboard. As we have seen that more than 70 ministries and departments had to fill the self-assessment questionnaire on a regular basis for over 600 schemes. And therefore, we felt that there was a need to have a dashboard which the ministries can use as a single point of reference. Hence, the survey was hosted on this online platform, which was user-friendly and could take inputs from the ministries and automatically generate the DGQI score. In the fourth phase, we focused on capacity development and partnerships with the ministries. Through this exercise, we ensured close collaborations with all the ministries. The framework was shared with the ministries, and the same was finalized in consultation with them. We also conducted several training programs, capacity building sessions for these ministries to clearly understand the exercise and the survey. The last phase focused on performance review. Finally, to ensure that the exercise is continuously used for reforms at the ministries, we developed ministry-specific DGQI report and shared it with the ministries. These reports also had qualitative insights and recommendations that they can undertake for driving reforms. This was also coupled with regular performance review, wherein we encourage all the ministries to reach the frontier score of 5 in a timely manner. Based on our learnings, anyone wanting to replicate the DGQI exercise should extensively focus on instituting the exercise by customizing the framework, measure their performance, drive reforms, and embed these reforms in scoring. Having explained this operational approach, it is also pertinent to focus on the 3 main levers of change, or the 3 types of institutional mechanisms that in our experience were most useful to improve the data preparedness of ministries. So one of the critical levers is that of data and strategy unit. Presently, if you see, monitoring, statistics, and data analytics functions under the ministries are spread across different divisions which work in silos with each other. And this hinders effective use of data. So to overcome this, we ensured that there is streamlining of monitoring and evaluation. The data and technology needs are understood, and all the ministries are encouraged. And to do this, all the ministries were encouraged to set up a data and strategy unit. This unit has cross-functional subunits such as the monitoring unit, statistics unit, strategy unit, and analytics unit under them. These units are mostly placed directly under the secretary of the ministries to function along with other scheme divisions for developing and operationalizing the action plan. The second lever of change was the action plan itself. After institution of the DSU, the next focus was on regularizing the processes. All the ministries were encouraged to prepare an action plan with short-term and long-term strategies and also strategies on how they will improve the data preparedness, keeping strict timelines and assigning responsibilities. An important element was to ensure that the action points under this plan are regularly monitored and tracked through the same dashboard. The last and the most critical lever is capacity development. To ensure that institutions and processes work well, there is a need for regular capacity development. All the ministries were encouraged to design a capacity development plan for upgrading their existing capabilities and augment data analytics in the ministries. So based on the approach and these levers of change, it was we prepared a roadmap that any ministry or organization can follow to achieve the highest level of data maturity. So first and foremost is to ensure that there is end-to-end digitization of all key interventions. So this would enable effective data collection on inputs, activities, as well as outputs. This will be followed by ensuring that there is a standard data quality protocol in place that regularly follows good quality, that is regularly followed to ensure that good data is collected right from the entry stage. The next step is to start using this data and use the findings of this analysis in policy making. And the last and the final leap is to move towards transitioning of these platforms and processes to an open data ecosystem. This will enable synergistic data sharing via open common platforms. While doing so, it is also critical to balance the benefits of data sharing with data security and privacy risks, hence requiring appropriate regulatory frameworks. So now who all can use DGQI exercise and how? DGQI can be used by 5 types of users. First, by national government advisors. So for example, any country wants to conduct a similar exercise for their ministries. They can use this framework to build a mature data system in the country. Secondly, state chief secretaries. For example, if any state government wants to strengthen their data architecture for all the departments, they can use this framework. State department principal secretaries. Now, if any specific division under the state government, say the education department in Maharashtra, wants to understand the digitization levels of all their affiliated divisions and institutions, they can undertake a similar exercise. Fourth kind of user is district collectors, town planning authorities, urban local bodies. So for example, a district collector wants to improve the data collection and quality of all the divisions within his jurisdiction. The collector can adopt this DGQI exercise. And lastly, civil society organizations, funders, academic organizations can use DGQI for testing the data maturity levels of their data capturing systems created for their development programs. So now, how do these users contextualize DGQI? They can do four main things. First is they need to understand the questionnaire and methodology in great detail and then customize it depending on the nature of the organization or the government. The user can also adopt a clear operational approach to implement this exercise. It is suggested that the self-assessment questionnaire is initially centered around the data systems and then the scope can be widened. The government or organization can then use an online survey mode for data reporting, ensure regular participation, and complete the first round of measurement and scoring. Based on this baseline assessment, identify areas of improvement, trigger reforms, and monitor progress on a regular basis. And lastly, to make this exercise more engaging and sustainable, the users can embed the reforms in scoring methodology, reward the good performers, and institutionalize regular review of progress for driving action. Now, based on our learnings of the DGQI exercise, there are some do's and don'ts that we think the users can take into consideration while contextualizing DGQI. So as mentioned earlier, the users should edit and customize the questionnaire and methodology to best fit their scenario. Have regular meetings and training sessions to ensure engagement. Maintain transparency throughout the exercise. There should be transparent sharing of the questionnaire and methodology with the stakeholders. The users can use an online mode of data collection. And to truly realize the objectives of this exercise, it is better to implement this exercise in a self-assessment mode. This should be followed by regular tracking of reform actions after the assessment, embed reforms in scoring to ensure sustainability of the reforms. And last and the most important thing is to focus on self-improvement rather than comparison with built-in rewards for good performance. Now, there are some don'ts that the users need to consider as well. The users should avoid opaque methodology. It is important that the respondents understand how they will be scored on the responses that they provide. Restrict any changes in the submitted responses after the closure of a round. This will help in understanding the delta change over a period of time. Since the nature of functioning and processes is different for different governments and different organizations, the users must avoid unnecessary and irrelevant comparisons. Finally, it is extremely crucial to ensure that the exercise is not implemented solely in third-party evaluation mode. The motive of this exercise is to ensure that the users understand the importance of data and trigger reforms themselves through self-assessment. Hence, the focus should be on enabling these reforms and not on evaluating the organization or the government per se. So in this presentation, we have understood why DGQI is important. Where does DGQI fit in the larger landscape of data-driven governance? And given that there are significant challenges in to overcome in the use of data, administrative data, coupled with fast-paced technological revolution that is underway, we wanted to share our learnings of the DGQI exercise so that other development practitioners, governments, organizations can understand and leverage the learnings of the DGQI exercise to transform and institutionalize evidence-based policy making using administrative data. Now, if any participant has any questions or wants to share their feedback, you can write to us on our email IDs given on the slide. We would be happy to connect with you to discuss the exercise or just to have a chat. So thank you so much. I now hand over to Aniruddha. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand, Gunjan, and Aishwarya. It was very insightful. Now the floor is open to questions, but in the chat box, I already see a couple of questions already there. So the first question I think is addressed to Anand by Kushan. Anand, if you can take it. You spoke about anonymizing data and interpretability of data. Isn't data protection law required first in case of personal data? And have you seen how Estonia is doing with X-Road? Secondly, how do we solve for data integrity at the source? And I will let you take the first crack at it.
Right. Sure. I think an excellent set of questions. There are three of them embedded in that one. So I'll answer each of them separately. Of course, for personal data, and now, in fact, if you are aware, the JPC's recommendations talks about not just personal data, but also non-personal data. Essentially, and they're now calling it data protection bill and not just personal data protection bill. It is an important milestone that India needs to reach. And of course, that will change drastically a lot of ways in which even governments handle these data sets, both personal as well as non-personal. In fact, very recently on 21st of February, you might have seen that there was also this policy about sharing and accessibility of public sector data, which has come up, which is up for comments by MITI as well. So essentially, these policies and these important milestones that overall government is taking is important. Our idea of having data privacy as a question in DGQI was to make sure that at least these government divisions who are designing these MI systems get started as far as thinking about it is concerned, because that is the first step. Second, some of these departments might also already be implementing some of these practices, and our idea was to collect those practices as well, because that can feed in as an input to what is already being done as far as something which is happening within the government as a whole for ensuring better privacy and security. So completely agree. Yes, the bill is an important step, and it will change a lot of administrative data systems in the government. And as and when that happens, it will eventually have to be embedded into the new DGQI framework as well. On the second part, yes, we have looked at Estonia and X-Road and the way it implements this entire idea, and which is where, in fact, the frameworks that Aishwarya was mentioning, these are not, our questions are not just driven by data maturity frameworks. Because if you look at the data-driven outcomes pillar and the things that we talk about, synergistic data use, prescriptive use of prescriptive analytics, and even interagency data collaboration, these are traditionally, some of them are a part of private sector data maturity models like IBM and CMMI, but within the government, they are not. However, these are essentially the elements that Estonia has already implemented, though through a very, very technologically oriented approach. And they also have a Public Information Act to support it. So we have looked at it, and it's a part of our pillar, but we have contextualized it in the Indian context, because Estonia is not a federal, so to say, it is but it does not have a federal setup, and so we have to be mindful of that when we customize it and contextualize it. Third, as far as data quality at source is concerned, I think there is a need for two sort of interventions. One of which is already being implemented across some of the very good programs. So for example, if we talk about data quality at source, it is important that apart from the program performance data, we also collect other data sets which can help you validate the quality of the data, like geotagging, like for example, photographs, like for example, videography, and various other data sets. So these are validation data sets and not programmatic data sets, performance data sets. So for example, if you look at Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, which is the rural housing scheme, every house that is constructed is basically the payment of the installments that goes to the beneficiaries for construction of the house are mapped and tagged to 3 different stages of construction of the house. So if you reach X stage, you get Y percentage. If you reach Z stage, you get A percentage of the installment, and so on and so forth. Now, each of these three stages are monitored through every house being geotagged and photographed at different stages, which then becomes the basis for release of the installment on the ground. So essentially, you're creating a very high quality validation data set along with the performance data set tracking the different stages, which can improve the quality of the entire system. And these sort of mechanisms are important. Alongside all of these learning, now this is for infrastructure projects. What can we do about social sector projects? What can we do about, let's say, some of the other sort of infrastructure projects which are not point driven but line driven, let's say. So there is a need for articulating some of these good practices which we are already doing under the DGQI exercise, and converting that in the form of measures that governments and even any form of welfare agencies can implement when they are designing their MI systems, to ensure that there is quality at source embedded into the design of the administrative data system. So back to you, Aniruddha. I hope I have answered your question, but if there is anything else as well, we can discuss that over email as well, because I believe there are other questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Anand, can you take the second? There's a question by Megashri. She's talking about government departments may have apprehension in digitizing of data. How do you deal with the
Mr. Aniruddha, can I explain my point a little bit?
Sure, please.
Yeah. Hi. It's a very insightful presentation and really a very good system which you are trying to develop, actually, and I'm sorry I've joined late. Just wanted to know from monitoring perspective how it will be feasible for the government departments. From the evaluation perspective, digitization of data, I understand. But as per my experience, I don't think government departments would like to give the direct access of the monitoring to the in the public domain, or wants to digitize their live reporting kind of thing. How do you look at it?
Right. So I believe you might have joined a little late, but actually this exercise which we are talking about in the system is not a hypothetical system. We have already implemented it over the last 2.5 years. And as we were explaining, close to 74 ministries, departments of the government of India have provided information for 630 plus such digital interventions that they have across the government of India on this entire system. So to that extent, the government has already adopted this and is already on board, and now is kind of in the process of implementing reforms to make sure that on this DGQI scale, which is a 0 to 5 scale, they reach the frontier 5 out of 5 scales in a time-bound manner. So that process is already underway. Now, as far as the apprehensions to digitization, especially monitoring related data digitization is concerned, I believe that the government, there are huge variations even within the government. You will find that there are ministries and departments, like the example I was talking about, the Department of Rural Development, Ministry of Rural Development. They are right up there. They have excellent degree of digitization, which includes a large part of it being used for monitoring. Very little of it being used for actually evaluations, because they largely capture outputs and to some extent only outcomes, hardly any impacts. However, there are departments which are still not there, which still have more than 50% of their interventions which do not have any digital presence and are still using paper-based data. So they are still not at the first stage of the GovTech revolution that we were talking about. So there is a huge variation, which is precisely where the exercise of DGQI comes in, because we're trying to make sure that everyone, be it the ones who are laggards or those who are the frontier ministries, all of them reach the highest level of digitization, and not just digitization, having data which is of high quality and also being used in a synergistic way for decision making, not just for their individual silos, but across at a sectoral and even at an SDG level, so to say. So to be able to reach there, this entire process is driving that coherent action for all these 74 ministries and departments.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to have, if possible, if there is any report or that sort of thing, I would like to read it out. So which ministries are have adopted, what kind of programs they have digitized.
So we have,
yeah,
correct. So we will be, in fact, if you visit our website, DMEO's website, we already have our DGQI toolkit uploaded, and we will be uploading the updated version of the DGQI 2 exercise, which is basically the second edition that we have recently completed, which will help you understand the nuts and bolts of the entire exercise in detail.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I have got another question for Gunjan. It comes from Dhruva Pardiyal. How do you ensure the data collection, analysis, and interpreting the team speaks the same language and has the same understanding? Gunjan, can you take it up?
Sure. Thanks, Aniruddha. I think that's again a very important question to be answered. Right. This also happens a lot in the government space, where data collection and the monitoring team and the data analysis team, they're actually working in silos with one another, and therefore, when a scheme is being designed, the data systems are designed to meet certain needs, which are then not satisfying the needs of a data analyst or somebody who wants to use that data to understand how is the scheme performing. And therefore, we see such problems. So I think there are two ways in which, two steps that can be taken to overcome this challenge. I think, first of all, on the process side, if we right away have specific guidelines for how data at all the steps of the data lifecycle. For example, for starting from data generation, if we can have some standard guidelines for how data needs to be generated. For example, in terms of granularity, we know that we will need unit level data to be able to do the type of analysis that data analyst teams would require to be able to identify the areas for improvement. So we need unit level data, be it beneficiary wide or be
or be it Chamatkara, can you silence everybody except for Gunjan maybe?
So yes, so we'll need unit level data. Then similarly, in terms of frequency, we'll need as frequent data as possible, real time wherever possible, or if it is not really required, then at least quarterly level of data needs to be there. Then, like Anand mentioned, for wherever assets are being built, geotagging and geofencing of assets needs to be undertaken. So there can be standard guidelines at all the steps. For example, standard steps for data generation. Then we can have standard set of data quality protocols that need to be put in place so that we're ensuring that good quality data is coming in for the analysis teams to be used. And then finally, even for the analysis teams, we can have some kind of SOPs or the processes or the kinds of analysis that they must undertake at regular points of time. So that's about the process side. But eventually, we all know that laying down guidelines won't be enough. These would need to be supplemented by regular I would say institutions or review mechanisms. So that's what we're trying to do in the form of data and strategy unit. So these units need to work together. Otherwise, this kind of collaboration won't happen. And that is why for every organization we have suggested, for every ministry, that there needs to be a cross-functional unit which is having people from monitoring side also, from the statistics side also. So monitoring will tell us what all indicators they need data on. The statistics team will come in with already the data that is being collected by some other agencies and tell us these indicators need to be collected more. Maybe we don't need this data on these indicators. And then the analysis team will then supplement it that we will also need these indicators. And finally, the tech team will be there to support this end-to-end digitization and to meet all their needs. So we need these institutional setups in these organizations for these teams to work together. And these need to be supported by regular, force and regular push mechanisms to ensure that this is happening. Also, it's also important for all of these teams to be working together right at the scheme design stage, so that all of these things are taken care of right at the scheme design stage, and they're not cropping up as problem later on when we set off as M&E. So these M&E aspects and data aspects need to be integrated with the scheme designing. So I think, thank you. That's my answer. I hope I answer. Anand, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, just to add one, so in addition to the brilliant point that Gunjan mentioned, I think, Dhruva, if you just take parallels from surveys or which are used for evaluations, how do we ensure that this consistency stays? We basically have what we call as evaluation metrics, which helps us build the analysis plans, right? So you have every question in a questionnaire which is mapped to a particular insight, which is further mapped to one of the objectives of your evaluation. Now, that is how we ensure consistency from the evaluation designer's perspective, as well as from the implementer's perspective. Same thing needs to be organized when we talk of administrative data for monitoring, the same thing needs to be done right at the stage of procurement. And which is where the institution that Gunjan talked about, which is basically the data strategy unit, comes in. Because when a new administrative data system is being designed, it is important that there are enough number of stakeholder consultations across the entire value chain, not just the ministry officials who are going to use that for their own decision making, but even the field functionaries. Because ultimately, the purpose of any MIS system or any administrative data system is to enable different types of decision making through a certain common set of data schema. So unless we have those consultations right at the design stage of an administrative data system, when the software requirement sheets and the data analytical requirement sheets are being prepared, it will not get embedded. And the DSU architecture that Gunjan talked about is an important enabler for that, for enabling that conversation.
Okay, I'm also aware of the time, so I'm not, I think this is a conversation starter, which I like, and there is such a vast topic to get into, and the rich experience which we have with the panelists. I think this is a conversation starter. Do reach out to them and they'll be happy to answer and get engaged in a more deeper way. And we can also have a number of other webinars to talk about portions of it in a much more, this gives a good overview to it, but we can talk about it in portions also, deep dive into that. Can I request Hasiti for the closing remarks now?
Yeah, sure. So am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead, Asela, please.
So good evening, everyone. Hope all of you are doing well and safe. I must say that it is my privilege to participate in this insightful discussion on data governance in quality index, where myself learned a lot. A huge thank goes to our speakers from the DMEO, NITI Aayog, Mr. Anand Trivedi, Ms. Gunjan Saini, and Ms. Aishwarya Salvi for their interesting and thought-provoking inputs. It was an excellent presentation with a nice flow, starting from why we need DGQI, what is it, and how is DGQI implemented for improving data preparedness, and who can use this, and finally, how can we contextualize DGQI? Thank you very much again for your valuable time and inputs. And of course, APEA board member, Mr. Aniruddha Brahmachari, thank you for the great moderation and keeping the audience engaged. Mr. Asela Kalugampitiya, thank you for the warm welcome and opening up the platform. And a special thank goes to the team behind this successful webinar. Punya, Pramoda, Chamatkara, Asela, and Randika, thank you all for your hard work. And last but not least, I would like to thank our participants for joining us and for their active engagement. I would like to invite all of you to keep in touch with Sri Lanka Evaluation Association for more exciting events and programs like this. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for participating in this wonderful webinar. And Anand, Gunjan, Aishwarya, this has been quite an eye-opener for all of us and insightful. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.